We've been talking about the spies and conquering Israel and what it's supposed to teach us in our own spiritual development. So just to summarize briefly, we said that Canaan, the land in its raw state, occupied by the 7 Canaanite nations, represents each of us in our raw state. Just like there were 7 nations in Canaan, each of us, our personality and character is comprised of 7 major elements. And when they are immature, then those 7 elements land up, unfortunately, taking us into places that are not the healthiest places. The goal is to conquer the land and to turn it around. So to change ourselves and to become holier and more spiritually oriented. So yesterday we saw something interesting, that there are spies Moshe sends and there are spies that Joshua sends. The spies that Moshe sends, they go through the whole land of Israel. The spies that Joshua sends only go to Jericho. The spies that Moshe sends, Hashem specifically spells out, I'm not telling you to do it. It's not an instruction. It's up to you. It's a voluntary mission. The spies of Joshua are instructed. So yesterday we left off saying that the reason that the spies of Moshe had to travel the whole land is to indicate that what Moshe wanted, Moshe is a very great person, the greatest of the great. So what he wants to achieve is the complete success story, that you should take every part of your character, including the ones that are very entrenched and ingrained, and totally turn yourself around on every single level, which is wonderful. It'd be amazing. That would be the most transformative experience that a person could ever have. But at the end of the day, it is aspirational. It is not necessarily doable, at least for everybody. Not every person will succeed in transforming their entire personality. We'll make some improvements. We'll become a little bit better, a little bit more tolerant if we're intolerant, a little bit more patient if we're impatient, a little bit more focused and disciplined if we're all over the place. Every one of us can grow. There's no question about it. And likewise, if, let's say, for argument's sake, a person is a chesed person and they're very kind and tolerant, but they do so in an unhealthy way. You know, I'm tolerant of everybody and everything, including things that are harmful to myself. So you could learn how to redirect that chesed and rather, put it into something positive. So we will have success. There's no question that with focus and with effort, we will have success in terms of improving and shifting our own personality. But to imagine that every person is going to get it 100% right and take every facet of their being and bring it to its perfection, that is a very high expectation. And so therefore Hashem says, L'daitecha, that I leave up to you to try. It's an aspiration that everybody should have, but it will not be a demand that I make, because I don't demand of you something that you may not necessarily be able to do. So what can you do? What is within the reach of every single person, and therefore can be demanded and instructed by Hashem? Because again, the principle is, Eini mevakesh ela lefi koichan, I only request things of you, Hashem says, that are within your abilities. Not my abilities, your abilities. So what is within our ability? If we are not necessarily confident that we can turn our whole personality around, what is the bare minimum? What is the so-called entry level? And not just entry level, because this is not a cop-out and it's not some kind of a compromise. This is very transformative as well, but also very doable. So what's very doable? To conquer Yericho, to conquer the city of Jericho. So if you're not going to overtake the whole land, okay, then at least what you have to do is you have to be able to take over what is called Man'ula Shel Eretz Yisrael, the lock on the door of the country of Israel. So if I can't conquer the entire country, meaning to say, if I can't transform my whole personality, I need to change the locks. Change the locks on our personality. Well, how do you change the locks on your personality? So it's very interesting that in Judaism, you can't be held accountable for how you feel or how you think, except for very rare circumstances. Let's say a person thought something along the lines of idolatry, so you could be liable for that. Not in a human court, obviously. But generally speaking, you're not held accountable for how you feel or how you think. You are held accountable for what you do with how you feel and how you think. Let's say, for argument's sake, and it happens to us a lot, let's say that a thought pops into your head and it's not an appropriate thought. Now, you could go do a whole self-analysis and say, well, the reason I have these thoughts is because my character is wired in a particular way, so I haven't yet succeeded in changing my character. That's why these thoughts pop into my head. That's fine. That's true. That's genuine. It's acceptable. The question is, when those thoughts pop into my head, what do I do next? Now, there are three options, because we're told that a human being, in order to interact with the world, and specifically in order for the neshama to be able to interact with the world, there are three major tools that we use, which in the language of Hasidus we call the three garments of the soul. Just like you wouldn't dare to walk outside without putting on appropriate clothing, like now it's cold outside, right? So you don't walk outside unless you're dressed warmly. In the same way, in the neshama, you've got to be able to have the tools, the garments that the neshama could use in order to interact with the world appropriately. So how does the neshama interact with the world? Three garments. They are called thought, speech, and action. This is the lock. This is the gateway. The gateway to change. The gateway to shifting a person's personality. Thought, speech, and action. That we can control. So even a person who says, I find it really difficult to overcome my natural chesed or gevura or whichever particular tendency, and it's going to take me years and years and years, and I don't even know if I'm ever going to turn myself around, that's fair. But every single person at any time is 100% capable of being in control of thought, speech, and action. So let's start from the easiest, and then we'll work to the most tricky. Action. Just because a person feels like doing something doesn't mean they have to do it. Just because a person has an impulse, right? Sometimes you feel, I don't know, you're driving and somebody is very rude to you on the road, so you feel like you just want to cut them off and get back at them. Okay, so that's how you feel. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you have to do. Somebody snubs you at shul, so you feel, next time I'm going to make sure to ignore them. Okay, that's how you feel. It doesn't mean that's what you have to do. Conversely, you wake up in the morning and it's a bit gloomy and cold outside and you don't feel like getting out of bed and davening. Okay, that's what you don't feel like doing. But you're 100% in control that you can push yourself to actually do. So what we call maaseh, action, is the single most accessible part of human growth. Because at any time, no matter what's happening internally, you can make yourself do what you're supposed to do. Or you could restrain yourself from doing what you should not do. There's no person on the planet who has an excuse to say, I can't help myself. Can't help yourself? No, we call that in Judaism, we call that being lazy. Everybody can help themselves. It just takes a little bit of focus. A little bit more difficult than that, dibur, speech. Because while a person usually has a bit of time to think before they act, very often you don't have a lot of time to think before you speak. You're in a conversation, worse, you're in an argument, and the next thing something comes out. It's what they call in the language, in Torah language, pleitas hapeh. Something just like flew out of your mouth, So something comes out, I should never have said that. So it's a little bit more tricky, but again, it's 100% within a person's control how to speak, what to say, and probably the most important of the lot, when not to speak. There's a saying in the Gemara that the tongue is so powerful, Hashem had to put two sets of gates in front of it, the teeth and the lips, to remind us how important it is to keep that tongue out of the way. So it's not so easy. You're right. It's not so easy not to say what's on your mind. It's not so easy not to share a juicy piece of gossip that you've just heard with somebody who you know will appreciate it. We get it. These things are not easy, but they're certainly not impossible. You can't compare the ability of keeping our mouths shut to the concept of trying to turn around an entire facet of your character that you were born with, and that's your wiring and it's part of who you are. And even thought. Now people will tell you, what do you mean? How can you control your thoughts? I can't stop these negative thoughts coming into my mind. I can't stop these judgmental thoughts, these thoughts of temptation, these thoughts of distraction. How do I stop them? So who says you have to stop them from entering your mind? That you can't. Machshava meshotetes tamid, that's the expression. Thoughts flow consistently. There is no time during the day when your thoughts are not working. You can't stop them entering, but you can certainly decide whether you entertain them once they enter or not. And that's the skill. That's the skill that every person should really learn. Because if the thoughts are healthy, the speaking will be healthy. If the thoughts are appropriate, the actions will be appropriate. Everything begins with how we think. We don't get to choose the impulsive start of a thought process. We absolutely do get to choose the continuation of a thought process. And so we have a principle in Torah which is called Hesech HaDa'as. Hesech HaDa'as means switch channels. Just because this is going on in my head right now does not mean that this is the channel that I have to watch. I've got my own personal inbuilt remote control. Push a button, change the channel. Now, it's not so easy, right? When a person starts to think about something, often it totally obsesses the way that person spoke to me. They should, and there's a history, and they're always like that. Or, did you hear about this thing? And you start thinking about it. Or, I would love to be able to do X and Y. I know that I'm not allowed to, but at least I can fantasize about it. Or whatever. All the different thoughts that a person might have in their mind. So, the advice that we give, or not we, that Torah gives, is that you should have Torah that you learn by heart. Whatever it is, a few lines of Tanya, a few Mishnahs, something like that. Stock white noise that you have in your mind. So that as soon as inappropriate thoughts come in, you switch to that channel. That's kind of your go-to channel. You just flow, that information just flows through your brain and blocks out the noise, because you can't tackle it in your head and start saying, don't think about it, don't think about it, don't think about it, because then all you'll do is think about it. So that's what we call the lock. That every single person can do. And so the spies that Joshua sent, which was just to get to the most strategic place of the whole system, those spies were instructed, because that message is imperative for every single person. And the lock, the entry, the gateway to all personal change is to shift how we think and how we speak and how we act.